The sixth chapter. I've never seen somebody so determined to burn a bridge they happen to be standing on. Brigadier General Kerry Rain. Fawn's world was silent when she removed her antler communication device. She washed her face, cleaned her neck, and around the smooth metal discs where her ears would have been, had she not have them removed some years earlier. The discs were mounting brackets for the antler devices, equipment which soldiers were required to wear at all times. This specific brand was grueling to wear on the ears, even with the most comfortable gel inserts. All unmodified devices were prone to falling off, even in a slight skirmish. The decision had been completely rational to Fawn. The outer ear was totally aesthetic to her culture. She had never met a human who did not wear antlers, at least one that she was not pointing a rifle at. She replaced her set, and both sides snapped into place. It gave her a minute buzz when it had finished booting and linked with the network. Fawn watched as Letchway shuffled behind her in the mirror. She grumbled a greeting as she entered one of the stalls, and Fawn mumbled back. Growing up in a militarized society had done nothing to change Fawn's perception of the eternally wicked beast known as Morning. She had wanted to tell the woman of the horrors which she had seen last night, but Fawn was the fire team leader. What purpose would it serve to rattle their confidence in her? As always, she would have to be reticent of divulging any concerns involving her mental illness. That is, if she wanted to avoid being locked away again. Even now she winced when she recalled the dark, blue halls of the Naval Institute of Mental Health. It was there she had begun to open the doors to this other world, one that lay between dimensions perfectly like her own. In this massive dark partition were where the words came from, spoken in long whispers before they'd ever become intense screeches. Then the shadows had come. Then the fractals. Beings that were there but not, their bodies lacking presence as they went about their unseen work. Fawn returned to her room to find Fletcher awake and fully dressed. She was listening to the news as she looked over her rifle. The firing pin sat next to her. The woman briefly looked up to nod at Fawn, then returned to her work. The newscast was blaring numbers to skew perceptions about the war and to keep morale up. But anyone who had actually set boots on the ground knew exactly what the score was. Fawn glanced around the room and saw that Chittle was still a blanketed lump in a rack. She reached over with her foot and used her leg like a javelin. "What?" she said, mumbling from beneath the covers. "Up," Fawn said, feeling an annoyance that only comes when one must be up while others still slept. "Ugh," Chittle said, emerging from the nest of gray army blankets she had made. She snatched her toiletry bag and walked out of the room like a zombie. Fawn returned to her things and looked down at the single sea bag that was her life, full of equipment and uniform the military had issued her, items they could easily take away. She sat on her bed and twirled her pink hair that was in a single thick braid. Other than a couple of styles, Fawn could not remember keeping it any other way. Letchway had tied purple ribbons at the ends of all the women's hair, a little reminder from her that it was still acceptable to enjoy cute things. Letchway was the only one of them that seemed to be desperately holding on to the fact that they were still women. Fawn liked the thought, but knew that it was not true for her. In her own mind, Fawn was not a woman at all, but a terrible wolf maiden, only allowed to roam because of the desperate circumstances her nation had been thrust into. The state had no love for her, and even with her aunt's influence would lock her away until they needed the killer in her once more. Fawn snapped out of her trance and saw Letchway and Chittle shoving their double-socked feet into boots. She put on her urban fatigued top and began to roll up her sleeves. It was an old shirt, and the fold creases were already well worn into the sleeves. The woman finished putting on their gear and headed downstairs. They humped across the quarterdeck and out the side door to the mess hall. Inside were scores of bleary-eyed female recruits, sauntering around with trays of overcooked diced omelets that the cooks called scrambled eggs, cold sausage links, and fossil-like potato slices. The women grabbed trays and shoveled the breakfast into the same spaces they had every morning since they were children. Fawn cut the line for eggs and thrust her tray toward a culinary specialist, who then dumped whatever egg dish she was making onto the largest section of her tray, teaching the girls who had just skipped a valuable lesson. Eggs are eggs, and the non-picky always eat first. The women sat down at a table that was not infested by little girls and began to shovel food into their mouths, adding ketchup, hot sauce, salt and pepper, to everything they knew would not be edible on its own. There they were, sipping bad coffee, waiting for time to pass, when the table was approached by girls with yellow ribbons. One of them was the girl on watch Fawn had spoken to the day before. The girls tied yellow ribbons just above the purple ones Letchway had added yesterday, then gave each woman a hug. "Aw, thank you," Letchway said, covering her mouth. "I guess the little fuckers aren't all bad," Fawn said, as the girls moved to other tables with veterans shipping out. Fletchett was unmoved by the gesture. The cold-haired woman had her tiny arms folded tightly and her chin on her chest. Chittle scooted away from Fletchett. "Mighty chilly over here," Chittle said. "If we were actually ending this, then fine. But we're not. Those girls are going to grow up to be us, dodging the same bullets from the same guns that we are," Fletchett said. No one dared to speak after such a biting rant. Fawn knew she was right. They all had seen a couple of campaigns together, but Fawn and Fletchett were a few years older than their comrades. They both had been child soldiers under Margrave Workergriff von Brocklin, a bloodthirsty noble that had always demanded victory at all costs, and it had cost him his life, along with countless others, and the innocence of his nation's children. His widow seemed just as determined and bloodthirsty in her own campaign. For their losses, those fighting had received a chest-gripping dose of survival guilt and restless nights until they met their ends. Fawn checked her watch, then hopped up and had another swallow of coffee before hefting her sea bag and heading to the armory. There she checked out the product of her parents' life's work, a protean instrument called the Toy Box. Like a Swiss Army knife, this weapon held a multitude of functions, such as a machine gun, laser saw, battering ram, and a semi-personal shield. Though this weapon thrived in urban combat, a terrain the women of the Widow's Retort constantly found themselves, the weapon had not been mass-produced. Hirsch and Doe, Fawn's parents, had designed dozens of other weapons and armor for the military before their passing, even the EP rifle used by Fletchett and all Army snipers. But the heavy brass felt the toy box was an expensive, convoluted mess. Fawn was even required special permissions to be able to use it as her primary weapon. Many could easily see why opinions of the weapon were so negative. It seemed to be solely designed to complement Fawn and her impressive physique. It was uncomfortable and awkward to hold in just about every formation to a person that was not her exact dimensions, as well as being extrusively heavy without the hovering actuators online. Even when they were, the protean formation system was activated by physical movements and gestures to save power, seen by the unenlightened as wild swinging, jerking, and slamming the instrument against the walls or deck. Fawn lifted her weapon and stepped to the side to sign it away. She was handed a medley of ammo. She loaded the weapon with machine gun rounds, grenades of all types, including white phosphorus, nitrogen, and gasoline for the flamethrower, and fuel cells for the laser saw and the hovering actuators. Fletchett had once mused out loud on how little the army thought of them to let Fawn run about with a bomb on her shoulders. Fawn turned on the actuators and the weapon began to hover at the height she had designated, always liking to keep it just above her waist. They all walked back to the quarterdeck, saluting the flag once more before piling into a transport vehicle filled with shouting and singing women, hyping themselves up for the hell that was to come. The truck lurched forward along the empty roads, releasing them from the confines of the base, and into the desolate streets lightly sprinkled with gray slush that matched the sky above. The women's singing was terrible, but it was nice to have a group of lively sisters for once, instead of the usual funeral processions. It could mean that these women were veterans who no longer flinched, even on the first artillery shell of an attack, or Buddhas who had never felt a hot round pierce their comfort bubble and graze their cheek. Either way, Fawn preferred their mood. Sitting shoulder to shoulder and hip to hip, the women swayed against one another as the truck swerved in and out of the lane. Any schmuck was allowed to drive now, as the only traffic ever on the road was a couple of buses that ran into the city a few times a day, and the transport trucks moving personnel between the bases. After some time, everyone had stopped singing, and a few of the older women who knew better closed their eyes and tried to squeeze out a few more moments of sleep. Fawn wanted to, but sleeping during the day always brought her back to the thoughts of her brother, Alpha, or worse, the hyper-reality she had witnessed on and off her entire life. She was also unsure if she would be visited once again. No one could tell her what she had saw the night before was a dream. She refused to sleep after it happened. She waited until daybreak and watched as her roommates crawled out of their racks slowly, zombie-like, but none of them were corpses. She looked over to Fletcher. Her dark eyes were listless as she hugged her rifle like a teddy bear. Then Fawn noticed that she was doing the same to the toy box. It was just as much a friend to her as the woman she had spent so much of her life with.